Welcome to the next session on smart cities. I'm Clara Nastedt. I'm the professor in the computer science department at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and also the director of the coordinated science lab, and I'm going to be the chair of the panel on smart cities. So it's really my great pleasure to introduce three exciting panelists who are going to actually give short presentations, and then we will open it to a particular discussion. So after each talk, please, if you can hold your questions, and then we will actually have a discussion overall. You can ask your question. So before I let the speakers talk, I would like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist who will present is Dr. Sokwoo Rhee. He's an associate director of Cyber Physical Systems program at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. And he's also currently leading the Global City Teams Challenge, which aims to create a replicable and scalable model for collaborative incubation and deployment of Internet of Things and cyber-physical system solutions. The goal is really to improve quality of life in smart cities around the world. So it's going to be really exciting to hear a perspective from NIST on the standards for smart city technologies. Our second panelist is going to be Dr. Carter Hewgley. He's the Director of Analytics and Performance at the Center of Government Excellence at Johns Hopkins University. This particular initiative, the Government Excellence, is actually one of the 5 partners with Bloomberg Philanthropies' What Works City initiative, helping cities around the world use data and evidence to improve people's quality of life. So again, it's going to be really exciting to hear what Carter has to say. And our last but not least panelist who will present is Charlie Catlett. He's the founding director of the Urban Center for Computation and Data Urban City, which brings scientists and artists and architect technologists and policymakers together. They use the technology, computation of data analytics and embedded systems to pursue insights into the dynamics, design, and sustainable operation of cities. Charlie is also a senior computer scientist at Argonne National Lab and senior fellow of the Computation Institute at the University of Chicago. So welcome, and let's start with Dr. Rhee to present.
Sure. So I'll stand up as kind of the way I present. I love to present. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in the morning, and this is a great opportunity to discuss about smart cities and IoT in general. Probably this is kind of a weird question here because supposedly everybody pretty much here knows about what Internet of Things is. But how many of you heard of a term called the cyber physical systems? Please raise your hand. Oh, most of them. That's great. Which means NSF is doing a great job. All right, so let's start talking about IoT, okay, and smart cities. These two the words or the concepts is a lot of intersection, a lot of overlap each other. IoT is a concept, and this is how we see it. Hardware in the bottom, communications on top of it, and third layer on top of the communications data analytics, and on top of it, there's a service layer. Now, when you talk about data analytics, by the way, I'm not necessarily saying it has to be a big data analytics. It could be a simple PID control implemented in an 8-bit microcontroller. When service layer makes a decision, that's what it does, the service layer, through all the data collected from all bottom layers. The action is taken. And when action is taken, the information flow gets reversed. Now, it's not from bottom to up, top, it's from top to bottom. And in smart cities, a lot of times the bottom two layers, the communications and the hardware layer, they corresponds to infrastructure. That's what smart cities, a lot of smart city experts talk about. And on top of that, there's service and data analytics. They corresponds to applications layer. So what is smart city? There are a lot of definitions of smart cities. Our definition is pretty broad, using smart technologies such as IoT and CPS. By the way, that's not only IoT and CPS, but any smart technologies to improve the quality of life. Now, that's also very broad. It could be more secure, it could be more convenient, it could be more productive, it could be more efficient. What is the issue as of today in smart city? Smart city is not a new concept. In the US and mostly in the European countries have been doing this for the last 20 years. The concept has existed for a long time. We are not seeing, as my personal perspective, we are not seeing as much improvement, as much deployment as we want to see based on the investment which was made for the last 20 years. And we started questioning why. And what we think is the issue is that many smart city efforts are one-off projects, and they don't necessarily think about what's beyond. There's funding years. If it's 3 years, 22 years, they spend money and deploy all these solutions, great. And after the funding runs out, then nobody is maintaining it because that maintenance needs funding and operational cost kicks in. So that's a big problem. A lot of times they do research and build a great infrastructure. Then suddenly after 2 years, nobody wants to maintain that. Second problem is lack of measurability. We have a lot of solutions out there that we claim that can address a lot of issues that cities are facing. But when you start talking to cities, the first question they ask is, okay, please explain that into the words that I can understand. Like, for example, are you talking about less congestion? Are you talking about saving energy? Are you going to save my expense, for example? That's kind of the things that they're interested. So we need measurability. We need to measure the impact of solutions. Now, as a result, these deployments that we see a lot of times are very much isolated and do not enjoy the economies of scale. So how do we address this? National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is NIST, is partnering with many groups outside of government and inside of government to create a program called the Gctc, Global City Teams Challenge. The concept is pretty simple. We want to bring in multiple cities instead of one city. And we want to bring in multiple technology providers and then create teams around certain topics and then let them coalesce, let them create teams and address the issues jointly, not separately. So as an outcome, we expect the outcome and the result will be replicable and scalable and most likely sustainable with a measurable impact. That's the goal of this Global City Teams Challenge. So it's been around 2 years, and we brought in a lot of cities and projects. Currently, over 120 cities for the last couple of years have joined with at least one project. It is important that most of you, when you talk about smart city, you think about large cities. That's not necessarily the case, and that cannot and should not be the case. Okay? There are 20,000 cities in the United States alone. And then how many cities, not many of them, not a big portion of them can afford to spend millions and millions of dollars upfront to install these solutions. So when you think about smart city research, when you think about smart city deployment, we always have to think about those cities like Winooski, Vermont, which is about 6,000 people. Okay, there's Ammon, Idaho, which is about 8,000 people. They cannot afford to have $10 million upfront investment to make their cities better, but they all want to make their cities better. Not going to go through all this. Another point is, when you think about the smart city, it is also not just about the United States. We have to think about the global aspect and also global interoperability. That's the only way to create the economies of scale. There are a lot of projects that needs a lot of research topics. Flood prediction is a very, very hot topic these days, not just in the US, for everywhere in the world. How to link up different sectors, like top right as a scale project from Montgomery County, emergency response, traffic system, and also like water management system. How are you going to, today they are very much isolated, and that's the way it was designed to work. Now, cities are being asked to do more with less funding, okay? So they don't have a lot of room they can invest new system, keep upgrading them. So what they're looking at right now is how to integrate this existing system, use smart technologies to get most out of it, and do something that they could not have been doing, couldn't have done so far. So think about how you can integrate these different sectors together, and what is the impact that you can make by integrating all that. Also, you have to think about sustainability in terms of financial. I'm not talking about necessarily the energy sustainability. I'm talking about financial sustainability. It's important to, the only reason I have this slide is important to work with partners. By nature, smart city, you cannot just do it by yourself. There's no way, okay? You have to work with virtually every stakeholder that you can think of. Industry, academia, nonprofits, cities, federal governments, foreign governments. So it's very important to bring as many stakeholders together and provide a platform that they can all collaborate and produce measurable and quantifiable results. So every year we do something called Expo through this Global City Teams Challenge program. So this is the culmination event that brings in all these teams, cities, and let them show off what they've got. And this is an opportunity that other cities can actually learn, and not just learn. Learning is important, but that's not the end of the story. They have to actually deploy the shared solutions to their cities to increase the deployment and decrease the cost of deployment. So this year we are doing it in Austin, Texas, June 13th, 14th. This will be probably the largest, I expect, there will be the largest smart city event in the United States this year. That's it, my email. If you go to gctcexpo.org, you can register for the event if you want. You can find more information through the website, or if you have any questions, you can ask questions now after this other presentation.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Dr. Hewgley.
You've given me a PhD that I never earned.
Sorry.
Is this microphone on? Can you guys hear me? Okay. But thank you. I didn't know it was going to be so easy to get one. So my name is Carter Hewgley. I am not a computer scientist. I just want to state that right out of the gate. I am a problem solver, and what happened to me is I kept getting handed problems, big problems, with too little data. And so I became somewhat of an evangelist for infusing insights into decision-making as often as possible. I spent the last 10 years of my life working in government, some local, state, but for the past 5 years at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I now work for Johns Hopkins University on something called What Works Cities, as she mentioned, which is funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies to advise mid-sized cities, just as you mentioned. We saw a need that cities who don't have as many resources as the New Yorks, the Chicagos, the Los Angeleses, really need help from partners on how to use technology, how to use data, and how to infuse it into their service delivery models to improve the lives of residents. And so Johns Hopkins, in partnership with the Behavioral Insights team, Harvard Performance Lab, the Sunlight Foundation, and Results for America are all providing basically free technical assistance to, our goal is 100 mid-sized cities over 3 years. We're finished with our first year. We're currently in around 30 plus cities. Over 140 cities have applied, so we continue to go out, assess, and figure out how we can partner with them. But I want to share a few insights based on my experiences so far. I've been with the initiative about 7 months now. Last night I just flew in from Gdansk. We were expanding to 5 pilot cities internationally. And it's a beautiful city if you haven't been. And they took us on a bike ride, and everywhere we went, there were these bike sensors that were showing you how many people had ridden on this bike trail before, and those sensors are going and feeding an app, and there's a challenge all over the country promoting the use of bikes, which I thought was great. It was really cool to see them excited about it and to see technology used to sort of drive the interest and behavior for more bike mobility. But when we had our meetings with the city, we spent the whole time talking about trust. We spent the whole time talking about how do we get our residents to believe that we have their best interest at heart. We were talking about a post-communist East European country. And the real thing we ended up spending most of our time on wasn't about bike usage. It was about how do we get them to believe in us. Before that, I was in my hometown of Chattanooga, which is one of our cities. It has the fastest internet in the country. They call it Gctc. It has open data for its budget, so every citizen can see its budget. And they're really well known for it, and I love Chattanooga. But the day before I arrived, there were 10 people shot in a spat of gang violence across the city. And we talked a lot about how, you know, they're making a lot of progress on a lot of fronts, but there's this one thing that keeps happening that they don't yet know how to solve. Before that, I was in Austin, which everyone knows is very tech-friendly. And I was there right after South by Southwest. And my colleague asked the mayor of Austin, you know, what keeps you up at night? And I was so surprised by his answer. He said, you know, if we don't do something right now, Austin will be Seattle in 5 years, meaning very few people will be able to afford it to live here. And the thing that made us amazing to begin with, we're going to lose it if one more person leaves here because they can't afford it. And so I went from thinking we're going to talk technology and data the whole time to really we're talking about affordability and how do you keep Austin affordable. And before that, I was in Chicago in December, and they do amazing work in Chicago. And we were there to talk about how they're predicting foodborne outbreaks at restaurants. They've got a chief data scientist there who's really outstanding. But I was struck by the fact that while we were there, we were seeing the middle of some of the biggest police unrest that this country has seen. That there's major, major mistrust between the police department and the citizens. And so the theme that I've noticed in all the cities that we visited is I'm amazed at how much our cities are using data and technology to improve on so many fronts. But I am also continually amazed at how far we are from applying the data and the technology to the most pressing problems that we face. I spent 5 years at FEMA, where we deployed to Joplin tornado, Moore, Oklahoma tornado, Hurricane Isaac, Hurricane Irene, Hurricane Sandy, Colorado flooding, Texas flooding, and in every one of those events, the number one thing I had to make sure we were doing was being relevant to the main problem at hand. Because if our data and our technology and the insights that we were using to generate action weren't relevant to saving time, saving money, saving lives, and or reducing harm, we were missing it. And so I think a big lesson for this community is to continuously remind yourself and ask yourself, is the thing that we're working on relevant to a real problem that our cities are facing? Because these leadership changes. Assume it's going to change every 4 years, and you have very brief windows to make big progress on really important topics. So I've got sort of 5 things that I think we could all be doing a little differently. I hope it's useful. The first one, I think we need to get more serious about doing fewer things better. I think this field in particular, for good reason, I think as you saw in the first presentation, is very adept at trying a lot of things in different domains and to see what works and to see if we can apply lessons learned in one domain to another. But I think that also puts us at risk of focusing too broadly and not really harnessing our resources to tackle a key problem. And so I think the more we can get people and cities to focus in and really decide and commit and harness the collective talent to solve a few particular problems, the better off we'll be. I used to work across the street here in DC for the mayor. And he was a mayor who said, you know what, I care about one thing and one thing only, education. And he was very controversial. But years later, enrollment in the public school district in the District of Columbia continues to go up. Reading and math scores continue to go up. truancy continues to go down. All of the indicators of whether education is improving in the city are looking better and better and better than they used to. And I think part of that is because he decided we're gonna do this one thing well, and not everything else matters as much. The other thing is that smart cities, in my opinion, are really about smart people who trust each other. All the technology and data in the world, it doesn't matter if the people can't use it and communicate with each other in a trusting way to solve problems. And I think a lot of you represent academia, and what I've noticed now that I'm technically in academia, although I'm not an academic, is that we need to create stronger relationships between our schools and our cities. And you all have a mandate to publish, and they have a mandate to problem solve. And there's a relationship there that needs to be better forged. And there's a talent pipeline that can be created to make sure that cities benefit from the brilliant minds of people like you in the room. Analysis and IT need to be at every table. I'm really tired of acting like analysis and IT are secondary to service delivery. I think they are critical, and I think that you should insist that those two are at every decision-making table, right alongside the subject matter experts who are on the front lines every day. As I mentioned, be relevant and take reasonable risks. I think constantly asking yourself whether the projects and the technologies that you're looking at and working on are relevant to real problems that people are facing is key. And finally, follow up. I think this field is particularly at risk of what I call shiny object syndrome, where a new advancement occurs and you keep moving on to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And in the meantime, we often don't learn whether the thing we tried 10 times ago worked, or whether it failed. And so I think coming back and relentlessly making sure that we're figuring out, did we really fix that? Did it really work? Because those are the insights that cities across this country, large and small, need in order to figure out what works and what doesn't work, almost more importantly. So they can stop trying things that we know just simply don't improve really important outcomes. So with that, I will yield my balance of my time to the next presenter. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Charlie Cutlet.
Just an explanation, array of things is, as you might have guessed, taking the concept of Internet of Things and merging it together with the notion of an array telescope, which is a collection of identical instruments, powerful in themselves, but give you better insight if you try to put them together. So we're in a project I want to talk to you about, which is to build an instrument that looks at a city. I want to back up from the instrument and tell you why we did it, because we didn't start out with the idea that we were going to put a shiny object on 500 street corners in Chicago, although that is, well, they might not be that shiny, but we noticed as we were working with the city and with social scientists and economists and policymakers in Chicago, we being computer scientists, that today's open data is sort of like the late 1980s anonymous FTP servers. So the open data portals are out there, but it was very difficult to find data that was relevant to the problem that you're trying to ask. So we set out to try to reduce the barriers to a non-computer scientist getting access to some of this open data. We built some tools that ended up not just helping scientists as this one here, and you can go to the websites at the bottom to get more details here, but the idea was to give a scientist a tool that would say, tell me what data is available about this place during this period of time. And to do that in such a way that you could then build on top of it. In the middle left there, that's a diagram of Open Grid from the city of Chicago, which is not aimed at scientists, but at residents, using the same data. So if you're a resident of Chicago, you can go into Open Grid and find out what's happening in your neighborhood in terms of city activity. And then the bottom left, one of the things that we learned right up front is that as nice as it is to take open data and do colorful maps, what cities really want is to use that data in an actionable way. Here's a project that we did as an experiment to see if we could not just predict crime, but specifically if we added weather and changes of weather, would our crime prediction get better? So here you see a color-coded map of the city of Chicago. all 866 census tracts, and we do predict for right now, and then 72 hours into the future, I've slid the bar over to 26 hours for take a screenshot. We predict for each one of those whether it's greater or less likely to have a crime of 3 different kinds there relative to the rest of the city. Now, because we're using weather, we're relying on 2 weather stations, really, one at Midway and one at O'Hare. So these kind of projects told us, you know, there are problems or challenges in cities for which we need better spatial and temporal resolution data. On the left-hand side, you see air quality sensors for Chicago from the EPA. And if you're concerned about asthma, for example, in that part of the city pick a part of the city, between one neighborhood and another, why is asthma in this neighborhood much greater than this one over here? And if all you have is these kind of air quality measurements, you don't really have the data that you need. You have some data, you have data about building stock, but you don't have data that you need. And then secondly, a lot of the things that we want to do from a computer science point of view with edge computing and being able to do real-time awareness and even deep learning down on the street require that you have a device that can actually do computing on the street. So we wanted to get this data, but we wanted to do it in a way that we could also enable research in embedding computing within the infrastructure. So we're about to assemble 75 of these things right here, which are open source hardware and software platform that will go up on city poles, and we'll put 150 of them up this calendar year, and then another 350 of them up next year, with several insertion points for adding new technologies to this open source platform. But I would say, and you can go online, it's arrayofthings.us, you can get the list of sensors and the capabilities we're putting out there right now. But I would argue that the most important thing that we're doing this project is that little black cable at the bottom that sort of loops down and plugs in. 120 volt AC standard cable with its own breaker to plug whatever we want into it over the next few years. At some point, this will be an antique from the tech standpoint, and what will be left is that black plug into which we can start to plug in new sensors or new capabilities. So the idea here is really, yes, we want to put some sensors out there, some edge computing, but the idea is to wire up the city so that we can come in, whether it's from industry or academia or education, and be able to put things out in the street in an urban scale, 100 or 500 things. The schedule here, we actually started a couple years ago with money from the Department of Energy in Argonne, and then got an NSF grant last fall, a major research instrumentation grant that will pay for these 500 to go up. It is a partnership with the city of Chicago in that their cost share on the project is to do the installation, and we're paying for all of the gear. But it's also a partnership with industry. We have Microsoft, Intel, Motorola Solutions, Schneider Electric, Zebra, and Zebra and I always can remember 5 of the 6. Big Belly is a different partner, so Cisco is the 6th one. So they're partners. These Northern Illinois, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, School of the Art Institute of Chicago are other partners for the project. As importantly, we have a partnership with 8 layers of management in the city of Chicago. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the room with 5 of them, 5 layers, not more than 5 people. So as the electrician that will go up on the pole, there's a crew of 3 of them actually, they'll do like 4 per day, all the way up to the Deputy Commissioner of Transportation. And we've been working with this group, but this is not something that you do over a period of weeks. It's really, we've been working with this group for about 2 years and bringing prototypes to the electrician's shop and having them give us advice on ease of mounting and electrical safety. And so that partnership is more than just the mayor says, let's do this, but it's really a partnership that's all these different levels. And I can say that all those different levels think this is a really cool project, and they can see a connection between this project and what they do every day. Now, that's good, but there's a much more important group that we're interested in engaging than the city, as important as that is, and that is the people that live in the city. So here you see a set of candidate sites. These are not the sites. The set of candidate sites that we're evaluating for the first roughly 150 nodes. And we're using a rubric that we're looking for 3 things before we even talk to an alderman about putting, or the community about putting something in their neighborhood. The first thing that we're looking for is a community concern or interest for which sensing and embedded computing might be useful. Having found that, the second thing we're looking for is a community of scientists who, if they had better data, could give that community more insight into that particular concern. It might be noise, it might be traffic safety, it might be air quality. And the third thing we're looking for, and this is where the partnership with the city comes in and becomes very important, is given that insight, is there something the city would be interested and willing to do in response to that insight? So all of these locations that you see here are the result of those kind of discussions. I'll just give you a few examples. You can see along the lakefront, and then these east-west down on the south, and then through the city center out. The atmospheric science community looking at the lake effect and air quality and things like that. But also both of those transects go across major interstates where we can look at air quality throughout the course of the day as traffic waxes and wanes. In the middle there, I keep thinking there's a pointer on this, but yeah, there we go. So right here, this is the Pilsen neighborhood. We're working with the Instituto del Progreso Latino, which is a charter high school that is aimed at healthcare careers. And this is the Stevenson Expressway right here, which during certain parts of the day becomes a emissions factory with cars just sort of packed in there. So here we want to look at the neighborhoods that the Stevenson goes through and ask, well, how does the air quality vary throughout the day? But more importantly, we want to do that inquiry with the high school students there. In fact, I'll just close with something here, which is probably, from my point of view, one of the more exciting things to come out of the project so far. I'm very excited about the hardware. We're excited that all of the pieces, including the boards and injection molding, are all done in Chicago, or in Chicagoland. But this is a classroom, one of 4 different classes that went through an exploratory curriculum on science and sensing this past spring, funded by the Motorola Foundation, and taught by faculty members from Lane Tech High School in the northwest side of Chicago. So faculty members from Lane Tech High School, but also faculty members from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. We took 150 kids through this 8-week curriculum. They worked in teams of 2 or 3 to, first of all, say, what would we like to sense if we had this wireless sensor system? And secondly, say, well, how do we design a sensor to do that? And then they did the experiment, and then they analyzed the data. The first time they went through it, but it was really, we had an open house a couple weeks ago, and I was able to walk through this room with 150 kids, along with other people walking through, and just talk to them. They each had a PowerPoint presentation and gave their talk, and that was what was cool about this, is that, yes, we're putting these cool things up, but we're getting these kids excited about science and being able to say, hey, I can have an idea, and I can actually make something and try it out. So I'll just close with that, and of course I'm happy to answer questions at any point about the shiny object.
All right, well, thank you very much for the interesting contributions to open our panel discussion. And maybe I start with a question, and then I would like to open it up to the audience to ask questions. For me, a lot of the directions that currently smart cities are going, you mentioned various projects. How do you see that we could actually sustain this particular effort? What needs to come together in order to sustain what we currently started? I mean, that was actually one thing that was mentioned, I think, and went through the set of presentation and statements.
Can we start?
Yes, please.
I was recently talking to, I think it was Cincinnati. They did some exciting data science project on blight and predicting, which pockets of the city and which properties are going to be blighted. A lot of the work was done in partnership with the University of Chicago's Rhee's team, And I was talking to Chad Kinney about, without that team, how do you keep this going? How do you do this again and again? And he said, I don't know that we could without a university partnership. And as we go across the country, the university partnerships with the local jurisdictions are very inconsistent. There are some cities that have amazing partnerships with, and that doesn't have to be the local university, but a university that really works with them and focuses like a research problem on a practical application. And I think there's just a lot of work for sustainability purposes that we could do to make sure that every city has got reach into the computer science and data science assets at universities to make sure that they can do this not on the cheap, but without having to have that in-house talent if they can't get it. That's my 2 cents.
So I'm going to make a couple of points about the sustainability issues. First, the smart city landscape has drastically changed in the last few years. Original smart city concept typically is you have a city, you have a bunch of companies. Cities come out with RFP, companies respond to it, there's a taxpayers' dollars and do whatever they do. That model works when city has a lot of resources and they can afford to do these kind of things, but not necessarily for the small and medium-sized cities. So for the last few years, academic institutions started to come in and trying to help cities, just like what you mentioned, for example. Nonprofits started to put in stuff. Federal government started paying attention to it. The problem there is it was a simple one-to-one relationship before. Now it's a multi-stakeholder relationship, which, frankly, as of today, nobody has figured out how the model is going to work. And the model has to include some kind of business sustainability built into it. And that's another thing that we haven't figured out. For example, when you do any kind of deployment research, somebody has to start investing on it. And then when they invest, they have the reason to invest. There should be some kind of exit. There should be some kind of return. And either it's a financial return or it's a benefit is so great that cities are willing to put in taxpayers' dollars as operational expense going forward forever. So that hasn't been figured out yet, and lack of investment group, either it's a venture capital, whether it's whatever, federal government cannot support 19,000 cities in the United States, 20,000 cities. There has to be a movement, there has to be a momentum built with the industry side to get it going. It's a big question. I don't have the answer, but I know that's the way we should all work together to make happen.
So I just want to second Carter's comments about university partnerships. And I understand what you're saying, Sokwoo, about industry, but at times I feel like we think about the sustainable business model first before we know what the usefulness of the technology is. And one of the things that I would say is disappointing to me about smart city efforts is that oftentimes by starting in that place, it becomes an effort of, how to make the city better for the person that needs to park their Tesla, rather than asking whether the public buses go to the right parts of the city. So there's, it has to be a balance of both. But the university partnerships, I was talking to somebody the other day, just trying to analyze how did I get to the point where I was working with the city the way I am and people that I work with. And it's really, it starts with relationships, but it's also a recognition that people who work in cities are not like us who work in universities, in the sense that they are bombarded with day to day, and they don't really have time to sit back and think about how to improve something from first principles. And so that university partnership can bring some help to those folks, but you have to bridge, you have to understand they're not going to respond to your email the way that your colleagues do. So you have to actually go into their offices and talk to them. And also you have to understand they're not a funding source. So it's really about understanding their needs to the point that you can adjust your research by finding an interesting need that they have, and then move forward that way. So we found a lot of projects with the city of Chicago that are really interesting data science projects. And so by identifying these, then we get professors and grad students working with the city at no cost to the city and at great benefit to those professors and students.
Okay, well, I will open now the podium for questions to the audience.
So hi, I'm Beth Minot from Georgia Tech. This has been a terrific panel thus far, so thank you so much for joining us in these discussions. I have no idea whether this microphone is on. Okay.
It's on.
The, I want to go back to, I think, Carter's initial discussion around trust. It's a terrifically difficult problem. Please give us some examples from all of the panelists of where this has worked thus far. What are some of the models or projects that have helped build up trust over time around these technologies?
I talk a lot about Denver when this comes up because Denver takes a different approach to their own city employees than I think a lot of people do in this space. So they have something called Peak Academy, where instead of sort of saying, you know, city employees can't do it, we've got to outsource it, or we've got to have a contract. They decided we're gonna train you to death on how to do Lean Six Sigma, how to do data analytics, how to think about performance, how to make your own world the way better and better as you see it and where you are. And they create these communities of people inside the city who've gone through, you know, trust is often built when we all go through a shared experience, and sometimes a difficult experience. And so they create this intense training environment around these principles of how to look at problems and diagnose them and make them better. And I think what you're starting to see in Denver is a growing and growing culture of people who's, they've sort of created this culture of inquiry where we know that the questions aren't gotcha questions. The questions are for the purposes of discovery and for the purposes of shared improvement. And so that's really one of the best examples that I've seen of a city really saying, like, we're going to take this seriously, we're going to invest in our people, and we're going to create an experience for them that helps them build relationships and trusting relationships between each other, all oriented around, you know, data analysis, technology, and program implementation.
I'll say about our experience with the array of things in Chicago. I would say there are two things that we are arguably over-engineering. One is reliability, because if the city pays to put 500 things up, I don't want to get a call that says, how come 100 of them died in the first month? But the other is trust and partnership with the community, and that for us has really centered around privacy, because our devices have cameras on them, and how will we protect the privacy of citizens? And what I've noticed is that, you know, there are lots of cameras everywhere, and Chicago's, you know, got over 20,000 cameras, depending on how you count. And I have, without naming names, I have colleagues that are sneaking sensors out into their cities without actually talking to the citizens, and maybe that's going to work for them. But we've decided that before anything goes up on a pole, we want to have a partnership and a dialogue with the people in that community. And that is a painful and time-consuming process because it means utter transparency, and that also means designing governance that is more than just transparent, trust us, but also has built-in accountability. So I've spent a lot more time thinking about governance and privacy than I thought I would, just because I wanted to, you know, see how the air quality was going to be on a corner. But I think that those two efforts of over-engineering, you know, it's a good investment, and if it turns out that we are over-engineering privacy and trust, that's okay, because it's all right if we say, yeah, but they trust us too much, right? We were too transparent.
If I just want to add one more thing. A lot of people understand the challenges working with the municipal governments and cities, but not all of us understands. I still get questions like, well, it's easy to work with cities. I didn't find any problem with that. Right, maybe they're very lucky, or they don't know what they're talking about. So the point is, research is one thing, but applying it and working with the cities in partnership, that process probably takes equal or more effort in certain cases than getting the hardware and software working. So please keep that in mind.
Hi, my name is Ori Wolfson, University of Illinois in Chicago. And we've heard quite a bit about organizational issues and business models. And my question is whether you guys see new fundamental scientific challenges in smart cities?
I can take a couple of questions. I already talked about the multi-sector integration and analysis as a problem. I mean, it's not a new problem, but in cities, fundamentally the city structure is isolated. So there's a water department, there's a energy department, there's different departments. So when you say scientific, fundamental scientific, you probably would want to rule out the business perspective or operational perspective. But if you cannot, obviously, remove the operational perspective from it. The challenge with the cities is the bottom layers, there's a complexity, there's so many different applications, and on the top layers, there are so many outcomes they want to have. So how do you actually get the layer in the middle who actually analyzes and make decisions to deal with these different complexities on bottom and the top? That is a challenge. I mean, it seems like
So I could maybe just talk about a couple of scientific challenges that we're. So one is we have models for how air and heat and pollutants flow through urban canyons, but nobody has instrumented one to tell us whether those models are correct. So we're in the case with designing cities or looking at these kind of models where it's kind of like we're designing an aircraft wing, but we don't have a wind tunnel to test our model. So there's some of these kind of, we have an idea of what's happening, but we haven't measured. And spectrum usage is another one. I happened to be on the plane last night with Dennis Roberson from IIT, who does spectrum analysis, but he does it with a few, as you know, devices on top of rooftops, and he said it changes from block to block and even a dozen feet. So we don't understand spectrum analysis because we don't have the measurement infrastructure. From a computer science point of view, all this talk of big data, well, there's a lot of data that's available now, and there's a lot more data that's coming from sensor networks. And I don't necessarily mean more volume of data, but nobody that I've talked to knows exactly how do you pull this together so that it's useful across disciplines or within a discipline. You talk to the cities, and the Chicago Department of Transportation has all sorts of video data that they don't analyze it to first order, and they don't have a way to combine it with the other kinds of data they've got. So there's some fundamental computer science challenges to how you even think about organizing this data. I could probably go on, but I'll just stop there.
I actually want to kind of add on to what Charles said. Measurement science is a big challenge in cities. I mean, you can talk about measuring the average time of arrival for ambulances. It's easy to say, but can you scientifically measure an average time of arrival of ambulances in a whole city? And depending on, and again, you have to think about which incidents you are responding to. Because without the measurement metrics, how can you actually make a decision that something was successful or not successful? So that's a big challenge.
I'm not sure if I have
Yeah. Well, I would just like to add there's a distributed computing major problem, right? Because you have this incredible scale, right? And low energy. That's designing devices and distributed computing with low energy at these edges.
Thanks. Jeff Hollingsworth, University of Maryland. I want to return to the sustainability question and ask, how are we going to overcome what seem to be some fundamental limitations in the reward structures of the three communities involved? You have municipalities, which are literally worried about the next fire. You have academics, which are worried about getting papers out, and multi-decadal activities are going to be very difficult. And you have companies which have quarterly profits to worry about. And it seems like all three are aligned against the long-term benefits that this smart cities technology would provide. How do we realign the reward systems in any of these communities to make it work?
I'm not smart enough to know how you realign the reward systems. I think you do have to choose the right problem. So you can't pick Chicago police mistrust among the community as the thing that you decide to partner on and expect that to yield a result that's going to happen fast enough for the political leadership and slow enough for academia. you've got to pick. Sorry, I didn't mean that to be insulting. It takes time. I understand it. I think you've got to pick. Deliberate. There you go. You've got to pick one that's high priority, but not an emergency. And I think that doesn't answer your question about the reward structure, but I think there are opportunities where our incentives do align, where there might be a publishable sort of research opportunity. At the same time, there's a solvable problem for the city, but you just got to know where to point it, I think.
I can't comment on the industry thing, but I disagree that the incentives of academics and city workers are at odds. I think they're different, and it's absolutely true that they're worried about a fire and we're worried about a publication, but in between there, what we've found, and maybe it's unique to data science, but we found a lot of really interesting projects that people are publishing papers based on having access to not just the data from the city, but to an understanding from talking to somebody who needs to use that data of what could be done to the data to make it useful to them.
Before Keith asks a question, so I think, and I'm seeing hundreds of different projects and industry, academia, and city collaboration. There are models, not many. There are successful models that you can identify and make them work. Question is, how do you replicate that model? So once a successful model is identified, you have to replicate it because there's no point of reinventing the wheel. That's really the question. And there is no single model that I can tell you.
You actually answered my question.
Okay. Wow.
Yay.
Please good. I answered the question. That's
Efficiency. Hi, my name is Keith Marzullo from NIDR-D. I want to ask a question on engineering. I appreciated Sokwoo's comment early on when he said that we're building these one-off kinds of projects are hard to sustain, and that raises the question of standards and common platforms. So I'm wondering, what do you think, how far are we from being able to develop meaningful standards and common platforms, and what parts should we be focusing on first in that space? Thanks.
I can say what our approach is, and so we think about standards and interoperability at different layers. Way down at the bottom, we decided to build an open source platform and to make sure that we support common ways for sensors to be plugged in, I2C, serial, USB, et cetera. The trickier ones as you go up the stack are things like how do you take a carbon monoxide reading from a corner in Chicago and compare it to one taken on the corner in Pittsburgh by the Carnegie Mellon guys with a completely separate device. And somewhere in there is the need for understanding what are the pieces of data that you need in order to interpret this piece over here. What's the context and what metadata do you need to save? Certainly you want to be able to look at the exact instrument that was used to collect that. But we've been criticized in the press, for example, who needs a temperature sensor on every corner, or humidity? I can already, or light. I can tell how light it is. Why do I need your device to tell me that? But if you don't have ambient light, then how can you interpret temperature? Because then you don't know if you're under an oak tree or out in the middle of a parking lot. And if you don't have temperature and humidity, then you can't really look at the gas. You need those to calibrate the gas sensor. So I think there are lots of challenges that as you go up the stack. And we're just trying to, I guess, maybe to go back to doing a few things well. We're trying to focus on a few of those.
So I can probably go on with the answer for 2 nights if you want. Standard is an extremely difficult issue in IoT and smart city. There are many standards out there, probably enough standards that we can make real progress today. The question is the market. When will the market choose the winners and losers? Obviously, I don't choose winners and losers. Probably none of us here can choose winners and losers. Really, the market, we're going to figure it out. The question is whether it's going to be 10 years, 20 years from now, or is there anything we can do together to expedite the process? Because I cannot force the market, but it's happening. I mean, industry consortiums are merging. I see this, the aggregation these days. The 4 major industry consortiums in IoT, they are merging. Well, not merging, but they are talking. I see a lot of the standard bodies talking together to figure out how can you find the intersection of these different standards? So it's happening. We, as a NIST, we always strive to help that, to expedite and catalyze that process. And frankly, that's probably the best answer I can give right now at this point.
Next question.
Thank you, Clara. Daniela Rus from MIT. So just building on the theme with standards and sustainability, I'm interested in what the panelists think about combining, or what is the right level between bottom-up development and top-down development. So bottom-up because all the projects that we're talking about come out of the passion of specific people. And so you have a specific industry or academic researcher who says, hey, I have this cool idea. You, CTX, won't you try my idea? But how do you promote that to more cities? And how do you do that in a more integrated way? And I just want to make a comment that I have been working on smart cities in Singapore since 2010. And Singapore has embraced the idea of a smart city big time, put huge resources, and everything gets done. And Singapore is probably one of the most instrumented cities in the world. Now, we built a transportation system for Singapore. We wanted to bring it to Boston. And we had conversations. Everyone said, wonderful, but how are we going to find the $500,000 for the engineer who will have to implement the system? It's certainly not the academia, because that's not what we get grants for. The city doesn't have money. So how can we bring industry, how can we bring it all together so that these one-off cases actually have a broader impact?
Not dominating, I don't, because Daniela, you pointed 3 extremely important questions in smart city today. Is isolation? How do you replicate a success? How do you get these bottom-up approaches to converge? That's precisely what I do with my Gctc, and I don't really have a great answer at this point. I'm in journey to it. Here's the issue. The issue of Singapore is this. They have so many experiences, so much, they build things built in. It's one city, one nation, but it's one city. If there are many cities who work together, actually, to get these things working, that would have been a little different than just one city trying to finish everything and trying to replicate to other cities. That's one aspect. And second aspect is I come back to measurement science over and over again, because if you want to talk about standard, you have to be able to measure what that means. And then that's kind of like a difficult thing to do. I'm going to just leave it there, because some other people may have
Oh, no, I was just going to, on the point about bottom up versus top down, I think I somehow have made a career so far out of standing in between and listening to the people who've got great ideas, but also listening to the people who are having to run the organization and run the city, and having that intentional design between the two, where I hear your good idea, it's not actually relevant to anything that these people are focusing on, or hey, do you realize that there are tools that we can bring to bear on this problem that you care about? I think creating that middle space between the two, I've seen work in my own life, and often build those bridges between each other.
I think 2 things. One, you have to understand what the challenges of, in this case, say the transportation folks, and it becomes a pull rather than a push of new technology. The example that you used, though, is, you've got a solution that you probably could agree with the city that they would love to implement, and there it becomes an issue of timing, where it'd be great if you could do this new idea right now, but $500,000 as the example is a very small amount of money compared to what, say, if you'd come to the city of Chicago a couple years ago with a new idea on a train system, it would have been good timing because they were going to spend, I don't know, $1 billion or so on the Red Line redoing it on one of the subways. But if you come to them now with a great idea, it might be a beautiful idea about that train system, but it's not the right timing. They're not making investments there. So I think there's a timing as well. I first thought of this sensor idea when I heard that the city was going to replace all their LED lights, and that was like 3.5 years ago. They still haven't actually done the replacement. So there's also a window of time when you hear about a need to get a solution in place, and by the time they actually do something, you could be ready.
Maybe a last question.
Okay. Well, just want to say I really appreciate this panel. I'm really learning a lot of interesting challenges with smart cities, but let me throw out one more. So technology, I mean, we expect technology to dramatically change in the next 5 to 10 years. And a lot of these problems you're dealing with are problems that, you know, will go on 5, 10, 20 years from now. So how do you think of not just using today's technology, but, you know, future technology, you know, with autonomous vehicles, for example, in future city planning?
A quick answer for me. I went to public policy school. I know nothing about computers. That's unacceptable for a city to keep hiring people like me. I think the thread that ties all technology innovations together is computer science and people who understand the ones and zeros at the root of all of this technology. And those are the people who we have to rethink, who we bring into either city services or form partnerships with. So stop hiring people like me, I think is the number one thing. You guys?
I think the change of technology is also why you don't want to get too enamored with today's shiny object. I was building a house in 1989, and I asked Sandy Fraser, who was a director at Bell Labs at the time, what kind of wiring should I put in my house? And without hesitation, he said, conduit. And it turned out I didn't actually need conduit because wireless networking came out a few years later, and so I didn't matter what kind of wiring I had. Although I actually did put conduit in one place, but you know, we're thinking about doing something in a city. You have to think long term because it's expensive to do things in cities. Even to put a breaker and a wire into a street corner is very expensive. So I've taken that sort of conduit story and thought, okay, well, that's why I said the most useful thing that we probably are doing is putting a 120 volt NEMA standard screw-in plug on every pole. And then when it comes to the data science, to focus on the tools that you need to apply data science to the data. So it doesn't matter what happens with algorithms, and we hope they will get better in deep learning devices, et cetera. But we still have this fundamental infrastructure we need to build to apply that sort of. So just kind of picking like that.
So my standard, I get that question a lot, by the way, many, many times. My standard answer is we have to work with platforms. We have to work with a platform that can be extensible, configurable, and upgradable, and plug and play. And especially for small businesses who do not have money to build the huge infrastructure, you need to have this platform. It's easy to said than done. Cities do not really work with the platforms. They work with the silo deployments. That's a challenge. But you know, for future-proof deployments, you have to come with some kind of consensus around the platform. I'm not expecting 19,000 cities in the US are going to share the same platform, but probably a portion of them can share some platform. They can leverage each other's investment and defray the cost of upgrading later. I would say that's a win.
Well, thank you so much for the very informative panel. Thank you for the questions, and I adjourn the panel. Thank you.
Thank you all.